Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Today, our guest is Martin Keeley, CEO of carbon capture and utilization pioneer CarbonFree. Martin, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Your story is a very interesting one, and I'd love it if you could share with our audience what it is you used to do before entering the carbon industry and how you ended up moving to America and joining CarbonFree.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Violet. Yeah. Delighted to be here. Yeah. So I'm, well, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm originally from the UK, Brit. So chemical engineer by background, and I worked most of my career in the industrial chemicals industry. So making predominantly soda ash, which goes into making glass and detergents. Worked for that industry for 20 odd years. Went off and then did some work in early stage water cleaning technology. And then actually moved to the US back into the soda ash industry with Tata Chemicals and ran one of the big trona mining operations out in Wyoming. And after about 5 years, was interested in to get back into clean tech. And CarbonFree was just a super opportunity because it's the convergence of climate tech and actually reducing CO2 going into our atmosphere, whilst being a chemical business. You know, we made real chemicals using CO2 as a raw material. So it was perfect for me, and it's been a pretty exciting journey over the last 5 years.
Thank you. Now, moving on to CarbonFree, could you please tell us more about the company's business model and what essentially sets it apart from other carbon capture providers?
Yeah. So the way we look at it, we have to remember that the carbon capture industry, if we want to sort of call it that, itself is a very disruptive new industry. You know, it didn't really exist in any form sort of 20 years ago. So we're all collectively creating this whole new industry way of doing things. But we like to think at CarbonFree that in the disruptive sector we are ourselves even more disruptive. Our first approach is that we have to be economically sustainable in any carbon capture solution that we put out there. It's just going to be long-term success. We all know we're focused on 2050 and getting to net zero. I think what sometimes people forget is net zero is not zero carbon. We are still going to be emitting a lot of CO2 then and needing to capture and do things with it. And to remain net zero, we're going to have to carry on doing that forever. It doesn't stop at any point. So we need to have sustainable business models for that. So our model at CarbonFree is we essentially do a build own operate model with our SkyCycle technology. So we come to emitter. Obviously, this week we're so excited by the announcement of our deal with US Steel, and we will be building the SkyCycle plant at US Steel's Gary plant, if we use them as an example. CarbonFree will be putting the investment in to build that plant, using private investment that CarbonFree raises. So we actually are doing this first plant without any government funding. We also can move faster if we do that, to be honest. And then we get the return on all of the OPEX for the plant and all of that CapEx from the products that we make. So we take the slag and the blast furnace gas from US Steel, and we make a very high purity calcium carbonate. It's like a very fine white powder, 99% pure, food and pharmaceutical grade. And because of the high returns that we can make on that, we're able to fund all of that process without US Steel having to substantially put their hand in their pocket. So it's a very different model to saying, somebody has to spend hundreds, if not millions, if not billions of dollars on building a plant, capital build, and then also has to pay to have the CO2 removed.
Okay, and since I know that you have two different technologies. You have SkyMine, which is CarbonFree's first generation technology, and then there's also the second generation, which is SkyCycle. Could you describe how both of these work and how they differ from one another?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great. We think of it as also the first generation as well. So this is based in, that's our plan that we have based in San Antonio. Essentially, SkyMine technology takes the CO2 from a cement plant, takes the other made raw material is caustic, sodium hydroxide, and then we combine those together through our SkyMine process, and make baking soda, which has the CO2 from the cement plant and captured within it. In conjunction with that, we run a chloralkali plant, which takes sodium chloride salt, so rock salt from that's mined in Texas, and makes bleach, hydrochloric acid, and caustic, which is the raw material. So our fundamental raw material is really salt, sodium chloride, and then we're able to sell those byproducts plus the bicarbonate. And so a lot of people at the point say, so why aren't you building more SkyMine plants, and why aren't we building a SkyMine plant for US Steel at Gary? And that's because we sort of pivoted to the SkyCycle technology about 3 years ago. And our original inventor, Joe Jones, who's our CTO today, had worked on both of the technologies for nearly 20 years. But with building our first SkyMine plant, we parked the SkyCycle technology. So we reinvigorated that 3 years ago. And the main reasons are, if you're in carbon utilization, i.e. you're using the CO2 to make products rather than just trying to store it under the ground, you're dependent on the market for the products you make. So you can only capture as much CO2 as you can sell in the products that you've made. So with baking soda, the market is relatively small, several hundred, hundreds of millions. The market for high purity calcium carbonate is much bigger. It's a sort of $40 billion worldwide market. And the market for calcium carbonate as a product, everything from roadstone to pharmaceutical grade that goes into tons, is a 5 billion ton market globally. It's a huge, so massive opportunity. So that's the first reason. The second is that we're able to focus on these high value specialty products. And then the third is, if you make baking soda, most applications, probably all applications, when the customer uses the product, they will re-release the CO2. You still get a climate benefit, which is great, but it's sort of transitory. With calcium carbonate, most applications, the CO2 remains locked up with the calcium in the product that you've made. So a good example is paint, I like to use. About 30% of paint is calcium carbonate. So if anybody listening to the podcast, if you suddenly just glance around your room, you'll see paint on your walls. That's got calcium carbonate in it. So in the future, when we replace that with our new zero carbon calcium carbonate, you essentially will be painting the CO2 from Gary's blast furnace stack onto your walls and storing it there pretty permanently. So all those aspects together make the SkyCycle technology, along with the fact that it has a much better capital base, a much better operating base as well, a much more scalable solution where we feel at CarbonFree we can make a much bigger impact on climate change.
Thank you so much. I wanted to circle back to the partnership with US Steel, which congratulations are in order for. But I understand that it has major significance, not just for the carbon capture industry, but also for steel and other hard to abate sectors. So if we could probably take a deeper dive into that. Absolutely,
yeah. You're right. It's there's a lot of excitement and sighs of relief in CarbonFree and with our investors this week. So, and it was very exciting. I was able to be with Erica Chan, who's the head of sustainability for US Steel. We were both in San Francisco on Wednesday at the Techonomy conference announcing the deal. So it was exciting to see all the support that US Steel is giving us as well. Yeah, we've been working with US Steel for about 2 years now. We signed an MOU with them just about a year ago. We sort of sealed our the real intent from them. I'll be surprised. I'll have to say I'm surprised, and I think my US Steel colleagues would sort of smile at this as well. But we did not expect the steel sector to be one of the upcoming first movers in this, nor really, although it took 2 years still, did we expect them to move as quickly as they did. But it's really, the pull through is for them particularly is is the demand and interest from their customers to US to have green steel, particularly the automotive sector. So I think what we're seeing is what I guess we probably all know really is that the ultimate drivers for carbon capture are really going to be consumer behavior. It's consumer behavior that's going to demand the greener products, which is then going to really entice the manufacturers to move. Really, it's probably going to be that much more than any incentive or any government action. So that's really what we've seen with US Steel's interest. It's been a great collaboration. It started off with, so interestingly, it came, as we're finding with a lot of partners, through the sustainability folks in the company who really introduced us. They were out looking for opportunities and technologies. And then we started a great collaboration with the site technical folks at Gary, Indiana, really working on technology in a collaborative and partner way to find the best way to fit our technology with their demands. So we came up with this new solution where we would take that blast furnace gas. We're able to use waste energy that's in that gas, which is a further recycling and circularity. And then also we're able to use waste slag materials. So the blast furnace process produces a slag from the burning process. And it has a lot of calcium in it. We need calcium. We're making calcium carbonate. So we're able actually to use 3 of their waste materials: waste gas, CO2, waste gas energy, and the slag. So it's really much more than just a carbon capture technology. So we then spent a lot of time working out exactly how this will work together. In the last 6 months, working through the commercial deal. And we completed signing at the beginning of this week. So really excited. It's a first step. It doesn't solve all of US Steel's carbon capture in one go, but it proves that we can do it commercially. And we have a lot of plans on working with US Steel to further scale that at Gary. And then also we're talking with other steel producers around the world as well.
So do I understand correctly that you had to kind of work this through as you go? It's not something that you knew how it would work going into the partnership?
Yeah, it's great. So we had our technology. We knew exactly how the SkyCycle technology would work and the chemistry within that. In the reality, every gas stream is different. So you need to work with that. We were able to work through realizing that there was residual fuel in the blast furnace. That's great because that gives you low cost and carbonless energy because it's a waste gas. So that helps with the LCA and the carbon intensity of the whole process. And then the other revelation was really when we found we could get into using their slag material. And it's very much focused us now on using waste materials as sources of calcium. So we're now looking at that in other industries as well, where we're looking to deploy SkyCycle. So it really was a sort of classic innovation collaboration where we uncovered things as we talked more with them and worked with them and found ways to really leverage all the benefits of our technology.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, because you mentioned that you weren't expecting the steel sector to be among the first movers in carbon capture, why not?
So my thinking was big, traditional, monolithic industries. And in my career, I've worked with a number of those. They tend to be slow moving. Certainly a lot of the initial conversations, there were challenges around, well, if this is going to be a significant capital expenditure, whatever, our budgets are set for the next 2 years and whatever. So as they started to understand that we would not be looking for capital from them, again, that's suddenly a revelation and allows the guys on site to say, "Whoa, hey, we can move much quicker with that in that case." So yeah, I think it was just we thought maybe we would probably get more traction by more innovative energy transition sort of companies, maybe who are sort of moving faster, maybe in the hydrogen space and things like that. But this has been great because obviously it also is a huge sector. It's probably, I think most people would say, it's probably one, if not the hardest sector to find, solutions for. It it's probably one of the hardest of the hard to abate sectors. So we're delighted that we're able to play our part in starting to show that, you can actually approach this differently. And, one of the things about, the Gary Works is there was a lot of difficulty and in finding potential geological solutions there, and quite a lot of resistance. So finding an alternative to, putting in long pipelines and underground permitting, and then all of the challenges of keeping the CO2 underground. They were delighted to find that they could do something which mineralizes immediately on the spot on the works in Gary, because we're actually going to be building our plant within their plant boundary.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to probably a bigger picture, I also wanted to get your opinion on the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on carbon capture. What have your observations been so far?
I think any degree of sort of stimulus and focus on the sector is great. It's certainly excited a lot of people. It's excited investors. That's good for us because, government funds are not going to solve the problem on their own. We need to bring in huge amounts of private investment. Carbon capture essentially is a capital solution. We need to build plants to do this. It's not a software solution. So just the fact of putting a spotlight on brings, investors follow the spotlight. So that's good for us. We're, as an early stage business, we're constantly fundraising, and then, we're, about to move into another phase of that. So that's very helpful. Just in terms of bringing interest, the 45Q improvements are welcome. We differentiate ourselves again in that we do not, our project and business economics are not dependent on 45Q. In fact, our process to make calcium carbonate is lower cost than existing incumbent methodologies. So that makes us highly competitive from the outset. However, we will be compliant in for the utilization levels of 45Q, and we'll be one of the first to be applying, and they're getting more of those because our plants will be operational within 2 years. And that's good because that's funding that we will use to reinvest in the business and further plans. We as CarbonFree, there is an anomaly in 45Q still, in that the utilization rate at $60 a ton is less than the storage rate at $85 a ton. And as I've been explaining to you already, sort of, and I'm sure people on listening to the podcast will get, there's huge amount more value in doing utilization and storage, and a lot more. We've invested several $100 million in developing this technology. So there's fundamentally an inequity in that. So we are backing very strongly the 45Q Parity Act, which will bring both utilization and storage aligned at $85 a ton. So again, anyone listening to the podcast, more than happy to talk to them about that. And we'd love wider support for that bill, which has been introduced. So the 45Q is helpful, but again, I come back to, the moment, the life of 45Q is going to be 10 to 15 years. It doesn't even get us to 2050. So if I come back to one of my first points is, we're still going to need to be funding, carbon capture, not just in 2050, but in 2080, sort of beyond. So we're going to need ways to fund this without subsidies, make this work economically. The other piece of the IRA and the IIJA is obviously the DOE funding. We have looked at that. Its funding is great, but it comes with a lot of requirements, and it can slow you down. That's why we were very keen to look at getting our first plant with US Steel off the ground fast. We will continue to look at funding, but even if you look at the most recent round of projects, I think it's the 33 that came out recently, a lot have gone to large corporates, and a lot have gone to technology changes as opposed to carbon capture. I think our quick analysis said that there may be about 3 projects of the 33 in there, which really are related to carbon capture. And I think only one of them is utilization. So my view as a person is we're not putting funds towards driving true innovation, which we're going to need ultimately to solve this sort of problem. So very helpful, brings a spotlight. I think we could still do better in terms of the way the money's being focused.
Just a quick question. You said only three other projects are carbon capture. What are the others?
I think that's fine. Again, that's my quick reading is one of my things I catch up this week on all of my emails after all our announcement stuff is we've done an internal sort of review around that. The others are all more sort of, they're a technology. So moving to from a different fuel source to a hydrogen fuel source, say from a fossil fuel source, or a technology change, which is part of using a different energy base, all which are great and sort of need to be done, but it still underplays the role and importance that carbon capture is going to have to play in decarbonization. And if you just look at that, less than 10% going to the funding. There's a really interesting PwC monitors investments in this space, and as well worth sort of looking up their stats. By the end of 2022 into 2023, transportation emissions in the world take up about just under 30%, about 28% of all emissions, and yet got 50% of all of the funding in decarbonization investment. Industrial emissions make just over 30% of all emissions. In the US, they're a little under 30%, about 28%. And globally, they got just 8% of all investment in decarbonization. So for an equally big problem, this hard to abate sector, we're still sort of ignoring it. And yes, we need to do transitional projects in technology, but these are going to take a long time to come to fruition. So, we just signed a 20-year deal with US Steel. So at least for over the next 20 years, we can capture CO2 and do something about it. What I think one of the saddest things will be to look back in 20 years, find blast furnace steel plants still working around the world and say, hey, I wish that we'd started decarbonizing those 20 years ago.
With all that in mind, how do you see the future of the carbon capture industry shaping up? And how do you see its potential to, actually help the world reach net zero emissions by 2050?
Yeah, so I think if there was ever any mission, which being getting to net zero, that sort of worked well with the phrase, it sort of takes a village to get there. I think it is decarbonization. And I'm glad that we're now sort of, we're talking about it as decarbonization in the widest sense. It's any ways that we can find to reduce the carbon loading. So, and we need to look at this holistically. So, which is very much what we're doing at CarbonFree. So, one of the things we haven't talked about is, yes, our first plant is going to capture 50,000 tons of CO2 directly from the flue stack at the US Steel, but the zero carbon calcium carbonate that we'll be making, and we'll be making 100,000 tons a year of that, will allow our future customers of that to reduce their carbon emissions through their scope 3s by anything up to another 200,000 tons. So those paint manufacturers, paper manufacturers, plastic manufacturers who will use our zero carbon calcium carbonate will have a huge displacement benefit. So actually the 50,000 ton plant we're capturing will displace and save the planet about 250,000 tons. So that's why we need to think about it holistically. I think we need all technologies and all ways forward to work and to be successful. So, we don't consider ourselves to be the only solution that's needed for everything. We are one of the solutions. We're one of the early ones out of the box, and we want to lead by example, show that you can make money, you can build businesses in this space. I think that's going to be important. Unfortunately, let's just be be clear about this. Technologies and businesses only work if you make money. We cannot build an entire industry based on subsidy. So, we are wanting to be one of the leading lights there to show that you can bring in investment and you can make money, and that will bring more investment in. It will bring investment in at the early stage as well to help other new technologies. So the space needs success stories. I think at the moment we have a lot of lone players. I think we're going to see over the coming years more collaboration between technologies. We're going to see the transfer of a solution like we've got for steel, the sort of adjacency strategy where we will now see how we can leverage what we've learned there into cement, into refineries, into glass making, into a whole range of other hard to abate sectors. So I think being careful not to focus on a single solution. The history of climate change and carbon reduction has been waiting for the next big idea and kicking the can down the road. A lot of people might have seen a really fascinating article in the New York Times this week about solar reflection. Fascinating science and technology, spraying solar crystals up into clouds, helping to reflect the sun, maybe helping to reduce atmospheric warming. Fantastic. As a chemical engineer, I love the idea of that science. Wish it really well. We need that to work. But let's now not all suddenly turn the spotlight on that and say, oh, we found the solution there, and stop doing all the other things. We need to push all of these different ideas forward and have a collection of solutions that get us to our 2050 goals.
Brilliant. Now, as a final question, maybe like a 2-in-1 question, actually, if you could please comment on CarbonFree's goal to capture 10% of industry emissions by 2050, I believe. And also, please share if there are any upcoming developments or announcements that you're ready to speak to, or hint at least.
Yeah. So, we said early on, you need to, the 10% was very much what we might call on a shot, wanting to say that, and it's partly to reflect what I was saying is that, our mission wasn't to capture all hard to abate, because, that would be impossible. 10% would be a massive lift, but it shows that we consider ourselves to be part of the solution, and a not insignificant part of the solution. So very excited that we've taken the first step this week, in announcing the first piece of our step on that. It's, the old time management adage that, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So this week was our first bite. Our next phase will be to grow the amount we capture with US Steel. Joe and his team are now working on our next scale up, which will be moving to 200 to 250,000 ton capture units, which will allow us then to move quickly to that million ton bite size goal, which will be needed for a lot of the bigger hard to abate sectors. So, and that's something that we can deliver very much in the short term. So that's our initial trajectory, towards that goal. In terms of near coming, well, we'll be celebrating this week's announcement for a little bit. That's why I was excited to be doing the podcast today with you, Violet, and appreciate your spotlighting on carbon capture, particularly utilization. We are working on a number of other collaboration agreements. So our model is to be in conversations with sectors until we get a point of significant interest, then to sign and announce a collaboration agreement, which means we are seriously working on finding a solution for that sector. That's worked very well with us for US Steel. So look out for a number more of those in the steel sector, and then look out for some in adjacent sectors as we start to look across. We have some interesting ideas on some disruption in the cement sector, both in terms of capture and in terms of products made, and also in the sort of blue hydrogen, where we think there are ways to accelerate the decarbonization of sort of methane to hydrogen plays, which may be much faster than and lower energies, and looking at some of the renewable energy plays. So some interesting other pieces, I think, to look out for.
Lovely. Looking forward to all of that, definitely. Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation and share so much of the important work that CarbonFree is doing, and definitely have fun celebrating today.
Thank you. There'll definitely be a bottle of wine tonight to be opened, I think. So thank you, Violet. Really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you and all of your listeners.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.